Hi, everyone. Welcome to the B++ podcast, a podcast where we speak to leaders, technology leaders, thought leaders, leaders from around the world. And today I'm very happy to welcome our guest, Kristen Buchanan, who is the CEO of Edify. Edify is a frictionless way to onboard software engineers. So when I first found out about Edify and Kristen, I just realized that she's going to be our savior because that's, an area that we deal with on an everyday basis, onboarding engineers after engineers. And some of the things that the solution does is exactly the kind of solutions that a lot of tech companies, and now that every company is a tech company, so, a solution that a lot of people can use. Kristen, thank you so much for being here.
Abby, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so just to understand for the listeners as well, so your company is called Edify, and you have a very interesting product, which is called Eddy, which is a Slack native application. Can you tell us a bit more about what Eddy does?
Absolutely. So Eddy, as you mentioned, is a bot that actually lives inside of Slack. And that is kind of the place that most developers are. A lot of developers that we know, in fact, many of the hundreds that we've interviewed over the years, actually have a whole monitor dedicated to Slack. And that's often how they're running their daily workflows. And so when we went to design a product to solve the pain points around the new hire onboarding process, specifically in software engineering teams, we realized that any product that we built for our customers needed to live in their daily workflow. So we chose to build inside of a chat tool like Slack. One day soon we'll also be on Microsoft Teams, but that decision really allowed us to build the flexibility of a bot that's an intelligent learning bot that can get better over time and help engineers really onboard well into their new company and also into their new projects and all of the code that they need to be comfortable with.
Sure. And what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen in the onboarding process, right? In the sense, I can think of 1,000, but I'm not an engineer, but you are. So please, maybe you can share a bit more because as a business person, I look at our engineers and I can see what their frustration is and I can see what their challenges are, but I would be lying if I said that I completely understand what they're going through and what those challenges are. So maybe you can share a bit more about that.
Absolutely. Well, some days I feel like I am an engineer, but it's really more that I play one on TV. I've spent the last 7 years working in and around software engineering teams and a long time ago did learn how to code. But I think what I have learned over the years is more of a translator between sort of most of the business, as you talked about, and the engineering team. And what I've come to realize with thousands of engineers all across the world from different countries, from different types of businesses, whether it's e-commerce or, fashion or back-end engineering, databases, cloud, any of those sorts of areas, is that there are problems for 3 different groups of people. There are problems for an engineering manager, so the person who's actually helping to hire and then supposedly onboard and support that new engineer. There are, of course, problems for the new engineer themselves when they start. Yeah. And then the third group of people is actually the existing team that the engineer is actually joining. And I'll give you kind of the top 1 problem for each of those things. So your engineering manager is really frustrated that they have to rebuild their checklist. So a lot of engineering managers have this checklist. It's either on Google Docs or it's a GitHub repo or Confluence page, wherever they keep their knowledge.
Right.
And it gets out of date very quickly because much as I love them, engineers are usually not documentation people. So they don't like to really write things down. And so that's a key way of communicating with a new person, right? So the manager often has to check that these things are updated, and it's a real pain for them. And then, of course, for the new hire, it's really challenging when you join a company, whether you're in person, like most of us used to be, or now remote, where everybody is joining remote. And in fact, so many people haven't even met their hiring manager in person anymore. When you're in your home office or your home closet, wherever you're trying to work from, you can't look around and say, okay, who can help me with this problem? Because a new hire doesn't have any context about where to find information, who to ask, how they should even ask. They often feel like their questions are stupid, and they're really not, right? They don't know how to do it. And then, of course, for the existing team, those are senior engineers who are busy building the product, right? They've acclimated, whether their onboarding was good or not, they're there and functioning. And when that new hire comes and asks questions, those questions to the existing team often feel repetitive or maybe kind of dumb, quote unquote. And it's hard for that engineer who is a senior team member to focus on their actual work. And so often you see the team's velocity, the rate at which they ship new features, really drop when they're onboarding new hires. So it's certainly a challenging experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. What you just described was what I call a Monday or a Tuesday or any other day, because I see that all the time, and thank you for sort of, painting that scenario so well, from all the different perspectives, because I don't think anyone could have sort of crystallized it that well, from the engineering manager and to and again, I always wonder, why are the new engineers not asking questions? Exactly, because when they do ask questions, then the senior engineers are getting annoyed about the questions that they are asking, and they always wonder, couldn't they just figure this out themselves? And so all of those things. So yeah, absolutely. And so I can't wait to tell our team that there is hope out there, and there is a product that can save them from their daily struggles. And I just feel, I've been saying that for years, and I'm so glad that you identified that problem and did something about it. That I believe that we hired the most competent people, and the problem lies somewhere. And I've seen that across organizations. We work with $200 billion companies. The same problems exist there. It's just that there are gaps. There are gaps in terms of. And the biggest problem arises, like you mentioned, around onboarding new engineers, because attrition rates are high. There are always people coming and going, and then project timelines are pushed back again and again. And the amount of disruption that it causes is crazy. And, I'm sure if somebody were to assign a dollar value to it, it would probably be like trillions of dollars or something. But it's crazy. So, people may not understand. People may be listening to this conversation, although, most of our listeners are business leaders, so they would understand. But for those of them who are not really, involved with software engineering and building new products, they may be wondering, what are these two people talking about, right? There are bigger problems in the world. I think this is a very, very big problem, and I'm glad that you're doing something about it. So tell me a bit more about how sort of Eddy works in terms of onboarding new engineers, and the three problems that you outlined for each of the groups. How does it solve some of those problems?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Abby. And one thing I appreciate so much that you brought up the sort of business problem. And in fact, we did some research, and we found that in 2018 alone, that problem of engineering churn cost $22 billion just in the United States. Wow. It wasn't even global. We couldn't actually find enough research. But we know that the United States is actually quite a small market for software engineering. And so it's got to be more elsewhere in the world. Yeah. And so I think you're absolutely right that this is a huge business problem, and it's often delayed, right? Because people don't feel it until someone leaves their team, or until a project timeline does slip, or a product isn't able to be shipped properly, or there are a bunch of bugs in the product because an engineer didn't understand exactly how to make it work. So I think you're absolutely right. But to your question about how Edify works, so as we've talked about, Eddy allows an engineering manager to build an onboarding program. And we think about onboarding as a 3-layer cake. So imagine that, hopefully you like cake, and imagine your favorite cake. You've got 3 different layers. And at the very top, you have corporate onboarding. So that's what HR is responsible for. That's your payroll, benefits, culture of the company, all of that key stuff, security, things like that. And then you go 1 layer down, and that's department, right? So let's say you and I are both starting a new job on Monday, and you're going to start in the finance department. I'm going to start in marketing, or you're going to start in engineering, for example. We would each get onboarding, or should get onboarding, that is specific to our department. Right. And then once we get down into that 3rd layer, we even get team onboarding. So let's imagine that you're starting in the engineering team, and there are maybe 3 different teams inside of that engineering organization, 3 different products, or even 3 different squads. And you might start on one, and that onboarding would be tailored to that particular product or team that you're joining. And that's really the sort of recipe for a great onboarding experience for a new hire, so that they understand the company, the organization that they're in, and the team and the product that they're working on. So Edify works at that team and that department level. And so it allows an engineering manager to build a very technical, very specific onboarding program. It takes about an hour, so it's not very long at all. And in fact, they can take their existing checklists, like I mentioned earlier. Most managers have this list of 50 links. They're just links. They don't have a lot of context. And what Edify has done, I actually ran another business for about 7 years prior to building this startup. And in that experience, I found there were over 400 different, what we call learning touch points that are relevant to software engineers. And they're in 4 different categories. So product, process, tech and tooling, and then finally professional expectations. So Eddy is actually pulling about 70 to 100 key questions out of that big database that are tailored to this company. So it is intelligent enough to know what kind of team this is, what kind of product it is, and it gives the most important questions to the manager. The manager can answer those questions or drop in links to existing documentation. They can even skip it, which is kind of cool. And Eddy is taking all that information and creating the onboarding plan in the background. And that manager only has to build that onboarding plan one time, because Eddy will actually evolve the program over the life of that team later. So once that onboarding plan is created, a new hire can be onboarded any time, right? So let's say you create it on Sunday night, you have a new hire on Monday, Eddy can run for that new hire Monday morning.
Right.
So every day for the new hire's first 30 days, Eddy is going to greet the new hire on Slack in the morning in their local time, and give them a list of tasks or readings or activities, people to meet, and give them time throughout the day to do that. And then at the end of that day, toward that person's kind of working hours as they wrap up, Eddy's going to check back in with the new hire and say, Abhi, how did you do today? Did you get this done? Did you get that done? And then you can tell Eddy, yes, I did get it done, or no, I didn't. And if you tell Eddy no, it'll actually give you some opportunities to say why. So maybe you needed more time, or maybe you need help with it. And one of my favorite features, and what we found is some of our customers' favorite features, is let's say you do need help with something. Eddy's actually going to go to your buddy that your manager actually named for you in Slack, and say, hey, Abhi needs help with this. Are you the right person to help them? And Eddy will then make that connection, connect inside of Slack for you and that new hire, or you and that buddy. And so that new hire is getting connected to the right subject matter expert to help them solve that problem. So what we found is that this product, this process inside of Eddy, actually gets a new hire onboarded in 1 month, which is 3 times faster than the average time to productivity for a new hire, which is crazy. We think, we interview engineering managers all the time, and we ask them, how long do you think it takes a new hire in your org to get set up? And they say, I don't know, 3 to 4 weeks. And then we dig deeper and we ask more questions and we look at baseline data, and it actually takes 7 to 9 months, which is really long, right? So using Eddy and this kind of onboarding actually will cut that down by 3x. So that's a little bit more about how Eddy works.
Right. I mean, that's phenomenal. Eddy sounds like the friend we never had, right? And the friend.
We hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
We've actually written Eddy's sort of voice. We actually ran it through, several different engineering leaders, several different new hires to help us hone that language. So it actually feels like a peer. It doesn't feel like a bot, or, when you get onto some website and a marketing bot is talking to you, it doesn't feel like that, actually. Right. It feels like a person who's here to help you.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm so thrilled with it from another perspective as well, because now that everyone's working remotely, I do feel, with our teams and, even when we work with our clients, I see this element of, loneliness creeping in, and it's in fact become a part of everyone's lives, right? So we are staring at computer screens and, just somebody across, 10,000 miles away is expecting me to do something. And we do get to a point where, it feels like I'm just supposed to deliver, number one, number two, number three, number four, nobody cares. So, I mean, some of the features that you spoke about is the fact that Eddy checking in to see whether, you need some help, and all of those things would, yeah, I mean, it sounds like, some kind of a help that people normally don't receive. It's just, it is getting very lonely. We've had a lot of our young engineers over the last 12 to 16 months, we've seen how challenged they feel. And it's just like, the Zoom fatigue or the burnout and everything. So I think, so that's an element that's quite fascinating as well. But before I forget, there was a question I wanted to ask you based on what you mentioned, and is the fact you mentioned that the engineering manager can sort of customize the onboarding, let's say with 100, with the checklist with, let's say 100 points or something. Now, are there any sort of templates that they can use, in the sense that, because I do feel you mentioned 400 points across 4 categories. So that's a lot. I mean, I guess a lot of, engineering managers would, right? So we go through this all the time in terms of, people not doing smooth handovers, and so there are a lot of things slip through the cracks. So are there templates that they can use?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked. So we actually preload Eddy with a template.
Okay.
And so the default is actually to do a template that we've built with learning science best practices and engineering best practices. So you can be sort of assured and guaranteed that even if you don't customize your plan, it's going to be a good onboarding experience for your new hire, because people are busy and they are overwhelmed. And it does make it difficult when you're just presented with all of this information. How should I organize it? And I think it's one of the sort of things that's close to my heart about this product and this company, is that I truly believe that engineering managers are trying to do the best thing for their new hire, right? And oftentimes they're not necessarily, not by anybody's fault, but they don't necessarily get the support that they need to really, manage engineers in the best way possible. Oftentimes an engineer becomes an engineering manager because that was the next career step. And much as, like I said earlier, much as I love them, they're often not people either. And so we sort of see that at Edify and built the product with that in mind, to help engineering managers just sort of kick it off immediately and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very important that you pointed that out as well, right? Because we can't expect them to be absolutely, people's person. And, like, in the sense, some of them are, some of them are not. And, some of them come from engineering backgrounds themselves. So they may understand the problems, but I've seen that a lot of them sometimes lack the patience to deal with some of the younger engineers. And because, also they have dealt with a lot of these problems themselves. So they feel that, why can't this person do it? So I'm glad that you mentioned that the product is built keeping a certain personality type, although we should not be generalizing. I've met some really empathetic and compassionate engineering managers as well. The other thing I wanted to ask is, how does Eddy fit into the overall sort of setup of, let's say, a project management tool? Then you have a tool like Slack or something, because we've had, this debate, an ongoing debate, a rather democratic debate, which never sort of comes to any conclusion about what's the best tool or which are the best set of tools. So how do you see that sort of fitting into the ecosystem of so many tools that already exist in our lives?
Yeah, I think that is a fabulous topic of conversation, because you see so many interesting tools, especially in developer productivity and the dev tool category, around helping engineers become more productive or have kind of a happier work life, especially in DevOps or, continuing improvement. And it is overwhelming, right, for an engineering team to kind of look at, well, I have Slack for this, I have GitHub for that, I have the Atlassian tools, Jira and Confluence for these things. And then I have 20 other tools, not to mention I have, 40 Slack channels that I'm a part of, right? And we actually designed Eddy to be, from a technical standpoint, what we call headless. And that's because We didn't want any other sort of UI or dashboard that an engineering manager or a new hire had to log into, because there's just so many things that they have to log into. And they're getting so many notifications that it can be really difficult to focus.
Right.
And so that's actually why we designed it to live inside of their chat tool, like Slack or Microsoft Teams. And we actually are building, we've gotten some excellent feedback from our early customers. And so we will be launching a web dashboard specifically for the manager's needs, but it's very closely linked with their actual chat with Eddy inside of Slack. And so because of that design principle behind the whole product, we can integrate with any tool, right? You can drop in a Jira ticket, you can drop in Confluence page, a GitHub repo, anything that you need, and you actually don't have to do any integration hooking up Eddy to anything other than Slack. And so it's pretty, I would say, agnostic to whatever your tech stack is. And one of the things that we are looking forward to doing is actually allowing Eddy to give back data and interesting insights to that engineering manager, even to the new hire, and even to HR, so that the engineering team doesn't have to be bothered to report back some of these key information points. They can just do their work.
Right. So, when you describe Eddy more and more, I just wonder if it's more than just an onboarding tool, right? So in the sense that it does seem like, if it's becoming a part of an engineer's everyday life, or like, engineering team's everyday life, then do you feel that it can replace some of the tools, maybe some of the project management tools, which I believe have been hugely ineffective, a lot of them. And, we've tried like dozens of them. So do you see that happening?
Yeah, I'm just so excited that you even think that, because it actually is very much our vision. So at Edify, our vision is to become the operating system for a high performing engineering team. So our future, our ideal is that if you are a high functioning engineering team, you are absolutely using Edify. Right. Just in the same way that most engineering teams are using sort of the big names like GitHub for their code management, or Atlassian for other parts of their project. A lot of those tools don't solve all of the problems of the engineering team, right? They're very point solution oriented. Yes. And so the way that we want to become that operating system is in the same way that when you open up your computer or your laptop, you don't feel your OS. If you're using a Microsoft OS or an Apple OS or Linux, you shouldn't necessarily feel it. It just allows your other programs to run. And so we actually want Eddy to do that inside of whatever tool you're using, right? So if you're on Slack, Eddy could give you insights about, well, here are all of the answers or all of the facets of knowledge, subject matter experts, relevant code snippets, anything that you need related to this query that you made, right? Or Eddy's reminding you, hey, your performance management, one-on-one is coming up for your annual review. Here are all the accomplishments that you've done over this past year. Do you want to talk about them with your manager? Or it's helping the manager actually say, oh, wow, this new hire who has become this kind of long-term engineer here, they would be a great promotion candidate, So we want to see Eddy grow across the engineer's lifecycle, from recruiting all the way to offboarding.
Absolutely. And I really do feel that, whoever can build a truly effective CRM system and a project management tool would be one of the wealthiest people alive in our lifetime. So, because I haven't seen a good one, I've seen, and one of the things I find, and, wow, I didn't know I had such strong opinions about, CRM systems. But one of the things that I find is the way a lot of these tools, treat engineers or people, using these tools as just, people who should be assigned tasks, and you just check their progress and assign tasks and check their progress, And I remember I was in one of the earlier episodes of the podcast, I was speaking to, the CEO of a software as a service company. And I said, which project management tool do you use? And he said, it doesn't matter if you have really smart people and they know what's expected of them. You don't need that. And it's so funny. I've always believed that. But then, all these tools are imposed on us, and it feels like, oh, if you're not adopting these tools, you're, sort of lagging behind or something. And then 5 people on your team start recommending some of these tools. But if you ask me, I haven't seen the arrival of any tool really significantly improving our processes. So, it's always about high quality people. And so one of the things that I find very interesting when you talk about Eddy is the fact that, it seems like a product which is built, putting yourself in the shoes of, an engineering team, and what are some of the things that they go through, from onboarding. And because the problem starts with onboarding, right? So, and the fact that I think if we respect them enough to know what it is that they want, and if we try to help them rather than just trying to make them accountable, right? So all the tools that we see are just trying to make people accountable without giving them the information that they need, or whatever, bringing them up to speed on any project. So that sounds very sort of promising, and I do hope that that Eddy is that tool, like you mentioned, the operating system that becomes an essential part of high performance engineering teams. So coming to your own journey, right? Because it seems like obviously you were an engineer, and so obviously you understand the space very well. And so how has the entrepreneurial journey been for you so far? Because a completely different set of challenges. Maybe you can share your experience here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there was one thing that you said just now that really struck me too, and which was, Edify has absolutely designed with our customer. And I think that that's actually, it shouldn't be unique to Edify. I think every product, whether it's a software product or something else, you need to be designing with your customer before you even write any code.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons it's been easy for us to get up and running and get customers on the product as a startup, is because of that. And so I love that you brought that up. But thank you absolutely for asking about my journey too. So I'll give you the short version, which essentially, I have a background that might be a little bit strange sounding, but it's in museum education and art history. So pretty liberal arts and far away from engineering. And in that, though, I specialized in adult learning. So I was very, interested and passionate about how adults learn as opposed to how children learn, how they learn in non-traditional environments, so outside of a classroom. And I spent a lot of time working in museums as an educator, even working in nonprofits as an educator and curriculum designer. And eventually, I started in my first sort of for-profit job, which was actually at a web development agency. And I had no qualifications for this. I'm not sure why they hired me, but I was doing their business development. So I was writing proposals. Maybe it's the art history why they hired me, because I could write. So I was doing sales essentially for these large consulting projects to build apps and websites. And I actually loved the work. I loved working with our customers and trying to understand what they needed. And I was often finding that our engineers didn't really understand exactly what the customers needed, because, like you said earlier, they were sort of just order takers, and that was how the company had set it up for them. And I felt like something was wrong with that. Yeah. And so I was trying to shift that paradigm at the company. And unfortunately, it was not my favorite place to work. It was a little bit volatile and a little bit stressful in ways that I didn't feel like were sustainable for me. And so back in 2014, I decided, I'm going to give myself a choice. You can either be a waitress and quit this job, or you can start a business and quit this job, because I really didn't want to get another job. I just felt like either I had an authority problem or something. I just didn't want to work for somebody else anymore. And I was not a really good waitress when I was in high school and college. And so I thought, probably should start a business, since that's my only other option. And that's when I started my first company, which was a services, consulting company. And so I spent almost 7 years building that company, and I was fortunate enough to work for technology organizations all over the world, for AWS Elemental and Open Sky, Alibaba, and Puppet, and all kinds of organizations. And so I got exposed to a lot of different types of engineering organizations, and a lot of different ways of working, and started to first have these ideas for the product probably back in 2018 and kind of let them go, put them on the shelf for a while. And then speeding up to kind of late 2019, I realized that, this actually had a lot of legs. And I started to talk to old customers about the idea of software. And for lack of a better, story, I essentially asked them, would you pay less for a software solution that was better than I was as a consultant? And I kind of worked through, I literally paper prototyped with them, drawing it on notebook paper. And it got enough traction with those old customers in my old business that I decided to stop consulting and start a new business and basically bootstrap the first version of our startup or our software with the revenues of that old company. So I started that new company in early 2020, so fairly recently. And we started to prototype more with customers and test and test and test. Eventually, we came up with a very, very specific set of MVP requirements, and we started to write code. And from the moment we wrote code to the moment we had early customers was only 4 months. So it was pretty quick. And that, just led us to this opportunity to raise venture capital and be in an accelerator, Techstars Seattle, and then to get even more customers and to continue to iterate with our customers. And that's been really core to our process, is trying to understand, okay, what is the true experience of an engineering manager, a new hire, an existing team member, and how can we continue to make their lives better? So that's really what my journey has been like. There's all kinds of colorful experiences that have happened along that, but that's the overview.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, sometimes not having too many choices in life leads to the best possible outcome, right? So I think that worked out quite well, didn't it? So, maybe, you can, what do you think has been the biggest challenge, right? I mean, so I was reading something the other day and it said, it's a bit extreme, but it said being an entrepreneur is like waking up every morning and eating glass. Now, I won't say it's that bad for any listeners trying to quit their jobs and trying to take that road. It's not that scary. Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. Every day brings a lot of challenges. So, what's been the biggest challenge for you, and what's been the most enjoyable part for you in this journey?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't think that it feels like eating glass, but I will say that there are absolutely days that are trying and scary or frustrating. I have certainly been in the place where I didn't know if I was going to have enough money for payroll. I have certainly been in the place where I didn't know what to do next, or I didn't, my old business, I didn't deliver something that a customer wanted, or there was a miscommunication, and things are hard. It's confusing, but that actually ties in. I'll answer your kind of second part first, which is it's the most fun I have ever had in a professional career, right? And what I love is not just one single moment, but it's all of the moments that allow me to experiment. That's what I love about being an entrepreneur, is I can wake up one day and have an idea and go talk to my team, and sometimes they'll tell me, that's totally ridiculous idea, Kristen, we're not going to do that. And sometimes they're like, oh man, we hadn't thought about that. Let's try it. And that's what it boils down to, is you can just try anything. And I love it. You can try anything for almost free, basically. Nowadays, you can prototype anything. You can run an A/B test. You can do all kinds of exciting things and just get so much insight. And I honestly feel like I am learning at the speed of light every single day. I'm just learning something new. And so that sort of challenge and that experience keeps me happy and excited and makes me feel nimble. And I just love doing that. On the flip side of it, that challenging experience, I named a few of them, but I'll kind of think back to probably the first time that we had a negative comment from a beta tester last year.
Right.
And, the first time, you always want your product to be perfect. You want it to solve all of their needs. You hope that you listened to them and you produced it, exactly to their specifications. And the reality is you can never do that, right? You can get very close, but then needs might change or situations might shift. And, the first time I read a negative comment, I was sort of heartbroken and like, oh my gosh, I've totally failed. And so that's sort of indicative to me of some of the biggest challenges of being an entrepreneur, which is there are very high highs and there are low lows, right? And so you can do that emotional journey, the roller coaster, in an hour or a day or a week. It can move and change very quickly. So if you're a person who is not that comfortable with that kind of volatility, probably being an entrepreneur is not the thing that you would like doing the most. But if you are comfortable with, literal and figurative roller coasters, then you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, I think, you, sort of crystallized it really well, in the sense that you do learn a lot, right? There's a lot of learning every day, thousands of things, and it's challenging. You can't please everyone. Sometimes you do look like an absolute fool with your optimism, but I think it takes a certain kind of individual to be an entrepreneur. So, so yeah, you're right. If somebody sort of prefers the stability and, living in the comfort zone, then entrepreneurship is definitely not for them. Now, although, I was speaking to somebody the other day and, he said the highs remain rather high and the lows are not as low as you progress and as you sort of, make the company grow. And so that's encouraging for sort of new entrepreneurs who feel like, oh my God, is the rest of my life going to be like this? No, it's not. It's going to get better or terribly worse. And then you can just start something else. But yeah, I mean, usually it does get better. So, tell me, how does an organization, if they want to implement Eddy on their system or in their ecosystem, how do they do that? What's the business model? Is it a freemium model? Is there a trial that they can explore? How does it work?
Absolutely. Great questions. So, Eddy is actually, as of this recording, still in beta, but we will be GA, so general availability, launched at the end of March, so March 31st. So at that time, you will be able to actually purchase the product self-serve, so you don't actually have to go through anybody at the company if you wanted to. But most of our customers actually, we meet with their CTO or their VP of engineering or some of their engineering managers. And often the very first way that they try it out is putting it in just one team. And I think one thing is important to recognize: anytime you're bringing in software, and you talked a lot about kind of some of the heartburn around project management tools and other tools that often feel like they've been put down, pushed onto a team. And we didn't want Edify to feel that way. And so one of the ways that we kind of manage our business is trying to get one new hire's life to be better. And so right. We, instead of trying to go to the whole company and say, you have to change, you have to use Edify for onboarding your engineers, of course, that all sounds good. Like everything you and I have talked about, of course, we would want engineers, to be on this and engineering managers to do it. But change is really hard. And oftentimes people are used to whatever they're using. And so we usually start with one new hire and then it expands throughout the organization once they get comfortable with it. And we do have a free plan, and that allows teams to onboard one person a quarter. And so that's often a really good choice for smaller organizations that are not growing as quickly. And then we also have a premium plan that allows an organization to hire for a kind of a number of seats, however many new hires they want to bring in that year. And so they can buy a number of seats. And then we also have an enterprise plan that allows us to work more closely with a larger organization and design something very specific to them in terms of what their onboarding plan needs inside of the software.
Sure. Sounds exciting. Can't wait to try it out. Yes. So, yeah, the other thing I wanted to check, you mentioned, something about adult learning. And, that's an area of huge interest for me and a lot of, our listeners who are obviously rather grown up and, but are keen learners. So what are some of your, you mentioned that, the way they learn and not, the conventional way of classroom learning or something. And I've seen actually, I was speaking with the CTO of a company the other day who went back to school. He wanted to learn something and he had the worst experience ever. And then he just didn't even finish the, program that he had gone for. So yeah, I mean, what are some of the ways that you believe, that adults learn better?
Yeah. Gosh, I'm sorry to hear about that person. It is really frustrating when I see, especially, graduate programs or continuing ed programs that aren't even using the most up-to-date neuroscience and science of how people learn. Because as ironic as it's going to sound, it's not rocket science. And it's actually pretty easy to implement some of these adult learning principles. But one of the things that's really different actually about how adults learn as opposed to how children learn is that adults need to be involved in the process of learning in a different way. And so adults need to choose, number one, they need to decide that they want to learn something so that there's a motivation involved. Number two, they actually need to be involved in the process of hearing the information, designing possible solutions, testing them out, and then applying and synthesizing that information. And that's actually coming from a really sort of well-known concept in adult learning called Bloom's Taxonomy. And it's essentially this pyramid that helps us think about going from sort of basic level thinking and cognition to higher order thinking. And it's a process by which we can think about chunking out information and helping adults understand each piece at a different level. So you really start with just basic understanding and remembering, like 1 + 1 = 2. And then you go through these 6 levels all the way up to evaluation, which is the ability for somebody, most, adult learners, to think about, is that information valuable to me? Is it true? Is it something that I want to put into my long-term memory, essentially? And a lot of this is happening very subconsciously. We're not, aware, like, oh, I am in the 3rd stage of Bloom's taxonomy, so I'm analyzing, right? That's not what's happening. These things are happening quietly in the background. And literally everybody who's listening probably does this on a daily basis, dozens of times a day. When you go to YouTube and you look for how to unclog a sink, right? Or you go and think, how do I change a tire? Or how do I do this? Or you go to Stack Overflow and you're like, well, what do I do with this function? That is that process. You have the desire, you have the interest, you are reading often or watching. So you're using a couple different formats of learning, and then you're going and trying it and seeing if it fails or if it works and trying again. And so if you are designing learning experiences or a product that is designed to teach people something, you really do need to be paying attention to these principles of adult learning.
Right. Wow. I mean, yeah, I don't know what stage I am in, but yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating. I mean, in the sense that, and I think it becomes even more relevant, especially, we are living in a gig economy. People talk about, there'll be more than 1 billion digital nomads, that learning sort of will have to continue. Things are becoming very dynamic. I mean, increasingly so, in the sense what was, it's not a question of, oh, I learned this 25 years back and now I'm going to retire with that information. No, we have to stay relevant. So, that's really fascinating. And, I would love to learn more about adult learning, because I do feel that, some of the times I am not very good at picking up new things and trying to, learn a few things. So what's next, Kristen, in terms of, for your organization? What are some of the goals that you're setting? What are the things that you are looking forward to the most? Obviously, general availability being one of them, I'm sure. But as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's, running a team, what are some of the things that you are absolutely looking forward to, on an entrepreneurial level? And the one thing that I try and ask a lot of people is, because your product and your business impacts people's lives, and especially since the lives have gone remote. What's your prediction of what the future workforce will be like, or the working model will be like?
Yeah, I love both of those questions. So, in terms of what's next for us and what I'm looking forward to, it's most, around product and team. And we are actually growing. We're hiring for a few roles now at Edify. And so I'm really excited to watch our team grow and to continue to nurture us. I love that process as a CEO and as a founder. And so that's really exciting and important to me. Also, our product, our customers are amazing, and I'm so happy to have them because they're so active in helping us design what is next in terms of the product. So we're already working on things post onboarding, like what we've talked about earlier today. And so that's really exciting, just seeing the product evolve. And, like I said earlier, with the sort of joys of entrepreneurship, I don't really know what's going to happen in a year or 2 years or 5 years. And so I kind of wake up every day excited about whatever I do today having an impact in a couple of years. And I just don't know what that is yet. So that's very exciting for me. And on the other hand, your second question about predictions, I love this question. I think that we are not, even post-COVID, post-vaccination, I don't think that we're going back to 100% office work. I think that the future of work that we'd all been talking about for 5 or 10 years, even prior to COVID, where people said, well, digital nomadism is going to happen, and the freelance economy, the gig economy, all of that's going to happen. People are going to work from home. And I don't think that business as a whole, this is a broad generalization, but I don't think business believed people. I don't think people wanted to agree that eventually this was going to happen, right? And there are so many huge upsides to this. Of course, lack of commuting, reduces pollution. It's more accessible and equitable for people to often work from home. There's so many upsides of it. There, of course, are challenging things. You have to make sure that you communicate well and you have systems for that kind of communication. But I think that we're going to continue this, and we're going to continue to see the sort of mobility of talent. And I'm really excited about, of course, because I run my company out of the United States, I'm starting to see companies be more comfortable hiring talent in other countries. And that's really exciting to me, too. I think that's going to be a chief way that we will build more diverse, more interesting, more productive and successful companies, is when you start to see companies where the norm is, well, we have engineers from Nigeria and Brazil and Singapore and all kinds of different companies, and we're all communicating really well and really healthily. So I think that is going to be, those are, I guess, a couple of predictions for the continued future of work.
Absolutely. I look forward to a world which is more diverse and where it's, everything's more, based on merit. And, as somebody said that geography can be destiny, and it had been the case. So just because you're born in a country and you probably didn't have all the resources, I think technology has actually democratized things more than any other thing ever has. And, I know people tend to be a bit pessimistic about what technology is bringing into our lives. And of course, yes, some of those things can be avoided, or we need to learn to live with some of those things. But I think overall it's really giving opportunity to people from, all across the world, right? So even if you look at vaccinations, so for instance, the level of inequality is crazy in the world. So I think there's a lot to sort of cheer when it comes to technology and how it's doing a lot to bring, that equality into the world. So, and it's the engineers who are building those wonderful technologies. And I'm so glad that you are helping those engineers and you're helping those engineering teams. And I hope Eddy is the buddy that everyone had been waiting for. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Kristen Buchanan. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.